Okay, we're doing a bit of work on the old Slant 6 today. Um, what I'm doing here is I'm actually replacing the valve stem seals. This motor's got a few Ks on it. It's got about probably 110,000 miles. It's a good runner, but whenever I'm decelerating, it seems to be smoking a bit when I take off again. I know the rings are probably a little bit worn on it, but these old valve stem seals certainly wouldn't be helping things. Now, it's a pretty easy job, and you don't even have to take the head off or anything. So I'm just going to run you through how we do that. So what you'll need is one of these, which is a cheap valve spring compressor. You can get them off eBay for a few bucks. They're pretty cheap. You'll need a little magnet. I've got one here that's got a little LED in the bottom of it, which is really handy for those dark places. You need a length of string. I'll show you what to do with that later. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So what I've done here, as you can see, I've already taken off the rocker cover. So we're going to do the number 3 cylinder. I've already done the number 2s and number 1. So just give us a sec and I'll just get set up. Okay, so we're doing the number 3 cylinder, and for a bit better access I've just removed those 2 push rods, and I've just got a little bit of flexible black hose here that I've fed down into the cylinder. You'll notice I've taken the spark plug tubes out as well, which is, they're a bit unique to these Slant 6 motors. Just gives you a little bit of a better view of things. So what I've done is I've put this black tube in there. All of my spark plugs are out, so there's no compression in the motor, so you can actually turn it over by hand, which is very handy. And what we're trying to do here is find bottom dead center. So I'm just going to roll the motor over. So push this tube down. And what we're waiting to see, as you see that, the pipe's just coming out a bit. So it means the cylinder's just coming up onto from the bottom of the stroke, and it's just starting to raise. So I'm just going to stop that now. I know I'm on the bottom of the cylinder, and we'll go to the next stage. Okay, we've got the rope stuffed in there. You notice I've got a bit of a knot tied here. That's just to stop me putting too much into the cylinder. I've got about probably 3 feet in there. It'll also stop, if you've got a short length of rope, it'll stop the rope disappearing into the cylinder. If it does that, you've got a problem, because you'll never get it back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to slowly roll the motor forward by hand. All I'm doing is just turning the fan belt here, and what that's going to do is it's going to compress the cylinder until it snugs up against that rope. Now that, I can't move the cylinder any more than that. So what that done is actually squished the rope up against the valves. The reason why we do that is if we didn't do that, these valves, as soon as we took the retainers off, they'd drop down inside the cylinder, which is would be a disaster. That's a drop valve, you'd have to take the head off. So yep, that's next stage. So we've got our valves held up, so next stage is taking off the retainers. Now most of these old cars, these little retainers in the top of the valves, they are glued in with oil varnish. So what I tend to do before as I get started with any of the retainers, I've got just a little rubber dead blow mallet here, and I just give it a few sharp taps on either side. So what that does, it'll just free that up, so those retainers pop straight out when I put the compressor on. The other thing you can do, if they're really stuck, is get just a plug socket. We stick that on the top and just give that a couple of sharp little raps. We don't want to go mad and bend a valve or anything like that. We're really just giving it a tap, and what you will hear is, you'll actually hear it after about 3 or 4 taps. You will see the note will change, and that's when those retainers have let go, basically. So what I'll do now is I'll grab out the compressor, and we'll do the next stage. Okay, here's another little tip before we get in too much. You notice I've actually stuffed an old rag here just down in the lifter gallery, and what that's going to stop is if any of these little retainers go flying off, which they can sometimes, they're not going to drop down into your motor. If they do that, it's another disaster. We'd have to pull the motor and drop the pan and get those out, so that would something we definitely don't want to happen. You'll note here that I've actually compressed run spring, and because we gave those a nice little wrap, you could see those retainers are actually quite loose now. They've pulled away from that valve spring retainer, so it's just those little collets, valve collets. We're going to get them out now, and that's where your little magnet comes in. So basically, I'm not going to be able to do this on camera, but we just go in there and lift them out. They can be a little bit tricky to get out, but a little bit of fiddling, you'll generally get them. Alright, that was a mission, but there's those two little valve collets that were holding our valve spring on. So all we have to do now is we just lift this straight off. Boom. And there is our crusty old valve seal. This one is rock hard, and just going to wiggle it off there. Oh, I have to go off camera to get this one off. Okay, so there's that rock hard seal. It's off. It's hard as a rock. It's absolutely useless. So just cleaned up that valve there, just gave it a bit of a wipe with a rag. We've got our new seal, which I've got soaked in some motor oil, and all we're going to do is just work that on nice and easily. Right, with the valve stem, we don't want to damage it. So we're just going to slowly work it down, and there we go. Boom. That is on. Like that, and then we'll go to the next stage, which is simply getting that valve spring back on. Alright, so there's a few of these videos on YouTube of how to do these valve stem seals, but one thing I never see, one tip that I've worked out just doing these few, is when you go to put your spring back on, always have a unloosen off your valve spring compressor and get it down as low as it will go, so you can really compress that spring, because that's going to really help you getting those collets back in, because that is probably the most trickiest part of the whole operation. It can be a real headache. So I've got that squished down quite tight, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop that back over the spring, and you'll see that I've actually got the grooves where those collets go on really exposed, so they're going to go on really nice and easy. So I'll just get them on. So that is that one done. So new seal, that one should be good. So it's just a case of repeating that about 12 times, and yeah, as I said, compressing that spring down before I put it back onto the head there. Those collets basically just fell in. It was so much easier than actually getting them out, and that is something, yeah, that can be a real headache. So yep, so now I'll just go on to, that was the exhaust valve, so I'm going to do the intake. Repeat another 6 times and I am done. Now obviously one last thing, that's those two done now. Once I've done, I've just backed off the motor a little bit, and we'll just pull that rope out. Out she comes, really easy. Done. Now you don't want to do anything silly like roll the motor over with the starter with that in it, because then you're going to bend something good and proper. So yep, just take out all the plugs, do it by hand, and everything's going to be safe and you're never going to have a problem. So yep, that's the end of the video. So yep, hope that was helpful. See ya.